Welcome to my Principles of Good Health, my fortnightly check-in with you on a topic that should be of interest to males, females, whatever age you are, but I particularly focus these on my ladies and gentlemen, sort of over 35, 40, as we're heading towards more middle age, things that can start to creep up on us without us realizing it. Now, tonight, I want to talk about inflammation, and I've put as the heading there, are you inflamed? The reality is that many of us are living with what we call low-grade inflammation. You may not be aware of this, but it is the trigger for long-term, more chronic health conditions like diabetes, heart disease, autoimmune conditions, and even cancer. So let's take the opportunity to review whether we potentially have low-grade inflammation going on in the body, and what are the signs to look out for, what may cause this low-grade inflammation, and then, of course, what we can do about it. Now, inflammation, there's two very different types of inflammation. We've got what we call the acute short-term inflammation. It's where inflammation comes into effect to protect and repair and heal us. And then we've got the longer term chronic inflammation that doesn't switch off. And this is the inflammation that we need to make sure doesn't occur. And I'd just like to use a sort of recent example of mine. I'm just going to sort of make some changes here to try and help the lighting. Hopefully that's a bit better. So I went running recently and I took a tumble. I really hurt my knee. Now, in terms of short-term acute inflammation, that's really important. We need to make sure that the blood that rushes to the site becomes porous, you get inflammatory cytokines, you get white blood cells that are rushed to the site, creates inflammation, it creates healing there, it created pus at my knee. It sounds horrible, but this is part of all the repair process that's going on to do the healing. And then, of course, my knee was stiff for a few days, that was inflammation, it stopped me using it effectively whilst the healing took place. And a few days later, my knee started to scar over. The inflammation went down, I got the movement back, and the inflammatory process did its job very, very well. That's great. The problem is when we get this chronic inflammation that's going on that causes the more longer term disease processes that we just don't want to occur. Sorry, the sun's just come out and I'm just going to move my curtains because I don't think it's making the lighting very good at all. Hopefully that might be a bit better, I don't know. So what are the signs to look out for if we've got this type of inflammation that might be going on long term? So number one is skin conditions. It could be eczema, it could be rashes, itching that's going on the skin. Of course, you've then got things like psoriasis, that's more of an autoimmune condition. But again, autoimmune conditions and inflammatory conditions, any type of skin condition is a sign there's some sort of inflammation and definitely irritation going on within the body. And then we've got aches and pains. Now, we may think as we get older, we're going to get aches and pains because that's just a sign of getting older, but that's not the case at all. There is so much we can do to reduce the amount of inflammation that's going on in the body. We don't have to be living with aches and pains. It doesn't have to be part and parcel of getting older. So it can be these aches and pains are a sign of inflammation. And then if you're suffering from frequent infections, or you've got infections that are taking a long time to get rid of, they're lingering, you're finding them hard to shake off, or they keep reoccurring on a regular basis, then your immune system isn't functioning very, very well. And this can be linked to inflammation going on in the body. Irritable bowel syndrome or other digestive conditions or poor bowel movements, particularly those that are linked to more loose stools or urgency, can be a sign of inflammation that's going on the gut barrier, the gut wall. So this may be more localized in the gut, but there is still inflammation that could potentially be going on there that can be a trigger for these other digestive gut symptoms that are going on. Now, in medical terms, anything that ends in itis is inflammation. So we might think of arthritis, we may think of rhinitis or tendinitis. So these are inflammatory conditions, but again, we don't want them hanging around for a long period of time. So what causes this? Well, let's start with looking at the diet. Anything that is a processed food, high fat, high sugar, cheap processed fats is going to be pro-inflammatory to the body. High intake of saturated fats. There's nothing wrong with some saturated fat, but a high intake of saturated fat does send goes down a pathway in the body that creates what we call pro-inflammatory messengers. So this can then generate putting the body in a pro-inflammatory state, creating a long-term effect of inflammation going on that we just don't want. Then we need to think about seed and vegetable oils. Now, we may think that it's better for us to be avoiding things like butter, but when you need to be very, very careful looking at the foods, even the drinks, and I'll come on to nut milks in a moment. But we need to be very careful looking at these because things like sunflower oil and vegetable oil used in the manufacturing process are damaged fats. They are not good and they most definitely send up pro-inflammatory messengers. Be particularly careful when you buy nut milk. You may think you're having the healthier choice, but look very carefully at the labels. A lot of nut milks I'm finding now and oat milks have sunflower oil, and I think that's an absolute no-no. We are sending the body down this pro-inflammatory pathway that we just don't want. Too much sugary and starchy food. If we start to put the body in a heightened state of, too much glucose going on in the bloodstream, this hyperglycemia that may start occurring if there is a high intake of sugary, processed, higher refined carbohydrates, higher starchy foods, higher processed foods. Too much glucose in the bloodstream has been linked to heightened states of inflammation going on in the body. Too many refined grains, too many white refined grains, too much gluten. These are grains like wheat, rye and barley. These are the ones that contain the gluten. Watch too much gluten in the diet. Not only can it be irritating to the gut wall, but it can put the body in a pro-inflammatory state. Alcohol, enough said, is pro-inflammatory. Watch your intake. Food sensitivities and intolerance. If you've done everything else and you think you may still be in a heightened state of inflammation, it may just be that this isn't allergies, but it may be you've got heightened sensitivity to certain foods. And I'll come on to talk about what we can do to address that issue. Chronic stress. I'm afraid that if the body is in a heightened state of chronic stress with a heightened release of cortisol, this is pro-inflammatory. Cortisol in small amounts, which is what it should do, is anti-inflammatory. But if you've got heightened state of cortisol, stress, then cortisol becomes pro-inflammatory. We don't want that to be going on. Poor sleep is associated with heightened pro-inflammatory markers. And actually excessive exercise. Exercise may make us feel good, but if you're doing really intensive exercise and you're not giving your body a chance to heal and repair, and you're doing too much intensive exercise and you're doing too much too often, it is pro-inflammatory to the body. So the important thing is, what can you do? If you think you may be doing too many of those things, or you'll recognize that you could have inflammatory conditions that are going on in the body, what can you do? Well, let's look at those dietary choices, and it's the opposite of what I've just talked about. We need to increase oily fish in our diet. Oily fish is especially rich in fats that are known as EPA, DHA fats. And these go down anti-inflammatory pathways in the body, like too much saturated fat and too much in the way of seed oils go down pro-inflammatory pathways. These fats, EPA, DHA from oily fish, go down anti-inflammatory pathways. What I mean by that is they send messages around the body saying that it should be anti-inflammatory. And the reason why some people can have this pro-inflamed state going on is because there's not enough anti-inflammatory messages to balance out the pro-inflammatory messages. We need to be eating 3 portions of oily fish every week, whether it's from salmon, mackerel, sardines, herring, with a little bit of trout. These are going to help you generate these anti-inflammatory messages. Other good fats to be eating that can be helpful are your cold pressed olive oil, olives, nuts and seeds, and avocado. Now, nuts and seeds in their pure state are okay. It's the seed oils that are processed that are not okay. They are not usually cold pressed. And so when you manufacture seed oils, which uses heat, you start to damage the fats. And this gives out what we call free radicals. And free radicals create damage to the body. We need to have a high intake of vegetables with lots of colour and lots of diversity. Most people are not getting nearly enough intake of vegetables in their diet. These vegetables have high levels of nutritional compounds, which contain antioxidants, or they contain things like polyphenols, plant compounds that help to create an anti-inflammatory state in the body. They confer the benefits that are given to the plants. They pass on the benefits to humans. So you've got to make sure you're getting lots of colour, lots of variety in your diet, and a lot more in your diet on a daily basis, not just on a weekly basis, but on a daily basis. And with fruit, we need to watch our fruit. We need to be focusing on our low sugar fruit, but the fruits you need to be eating in more abundance are our red, purple colours, the berries. They're low sugar, and again, they're very, very rich in antioxidants like vitamin C and these plant compounds like polyphenols that are highly anti-inflammatory to the body. We need plenty of herbs for the same reason. And we need to be thinking of eating more turmeric because the active compound called curcumin is known to be highly anti-inflammatory to the body. So food sensitivities, as I said, if you're unsure whether you might have food sensitivity, do get in touch with me. There are some very, very good quality tests on the market, but you do need to make sure you're getting a good quality test. And these are the ones that do finger prick blood testing and can test for raised IgG antibodies in the bloodstream. Different to a true food allergy, we're looking at the more subtle food intolerances, food sensitivities, that are far more subtle, and you may not be aware they could be creating some inflammation because of the markers that they're driving through the bloodstream. Now, in terms of supplements, you may want to think about supplements if you're concerned about it. If you're not eating the oily fish, and if you're vegetarian or vegan, you can get good quality supplements with high levels of EPA, DHA, fish oils with high intake of EPA, or algae-based supplements as well for those who are vegan or vegetarian, because they are driving the anti-inflammatory messages in the body. The same with curcumin supplements, and you want those to be high in fat-soluble formula. It's no good just buying any old curcumin supplement. You need a fat-soluble formula because curcumin is not well absorbed from the gut into the bloodstream, and therefore it needs to be in the fat to be well absorbed. And the final supplement you may want to consider is something that you may never have heard of before. If I use the word proteolytic enzyme, you may wonder what on earth I'm talking about. We're thinking here of things like bromelain, which you find in pineapple stems, and serrapeptase. Now, these should be taken well away from food, because if you have them with your food, they are just going to help digest the protein content of your meal, and they're not going to have the anti-inflammatory effect within the body. These can get to the sites of inflammation like within joints, and they help to break down debris and inflammatory debris and compounds at the site like joints where there is inflammation going on, helps to clear it away, can help to drive down inflammation at those sites. So here's just a few tips to follow. Really think about reviewing your food intake and what you're eating. Is it more anti-inflammatory, or actually, when you really look closely at it, is it a pro-inflammatory diet? We really need to be making sure that we are driving an anti-inflammatory diet and that we're avoiding creating this low-level chronic inflammation that's going on in the body that can be a major driver for more serious health conditions that could be a potential thing creeping up in the body at a later date. Do remember, check out my YouTube channel, Peyton Principles Natural Health, for all my videos that I record. Also my website for more detailed blogs that I give. And if you want to make sure you're getting regular intake of my news, do come and subscribe to my website. And you can do this through my website called peytonprinciples.com. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to catching up with you next Tuesday at 6 o'clock.